everybody, welcome back to Iron Culture. It is me, Eric Trexler. Huge relief by the grace of God. We are not joined by Dr. Eric Helms tonight. It is just me and our esteemed guest, Dr. John Rusin. John, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Eric, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So to get started here, I don't think we've ever had you on the show, which is a bit of a surprise, but we're happy to have you now. That is our mistake. We're 350-something episodes in. We finally rectified that. But John, just in case, I'm sure many people in our audience will be very familiar with you and your work. Some percentage will not be. So do you mind giving us, just kind of a quick overview of your background, how you got into this space, maybe some of your credentials, and really what is your thing that you kind of bring to fitness? What is your area that kind of occupies your mind?
Well, I'm a personal trainer, strength coach. I went to school, have a doctorate in physical therapy, and over the last 19 years, I've worked in a lot of different areas of the fitness and the sports performance industry. After leaving doctorate of physical therapy graduate school, I didn't end up being a physical therapist. I went right back into sports performance where I actually got my start. And I ended up working for about a decade in high performance athletics with mostly Major League Baseball, NFL offseason, and then working with the Olympic athletes as well. And that was super cool. And that's what I wanted to do, especially when I was coming up as an athlete myself. And then, 10 years later, I find myself dabbling into the focus being health and longevity and taking myself from 99% of my client load being professional athletes to now 90% of my client load being just general people that want to look and feel good, that want to be healthy, want to extend their lives and have longevity, and use training and nutrition and lifestyle management as a source to be able to do that.
Awesome. So you mentioned your background as an athlete. What was your sport of choice?
So in high school, I was baseball, basketball, and football, as every great American has come up on. And in college, I was a Division I baseball player.
Awesome. Where at?
I did St. Bonaventure University was where I started off, and I went to University of Rhode Island after transferring in.
Cool. Very cool.
I mean, it's not Duke, but
you transfer at the wrong time. Nowadays, you get to transfer every year, do whatever you want to do. You can be all over the place. It's crazy. I mean, I love college sport, not knocking it. I'm glad that athletes have the freedom to kind of pursue what's right for their career and everything. But it is crazy. You're watching a college football game and you're like, this guy is redshirt junior at his fourth university.
Dude, it is so tough to watch college sports today for that exact reason, because you see their list of schools that they've gone to and you're like, holy crap. Back when I played baseball, where I'm really dating myself now, we still had the ability to transfer one time without having to sit out. And it was a lot different than basketball and football at the time. So I had a really good off season. I went down to the Florida Collegiate League. I led the league in hitting, and then I was like, oh, I guess I can go to a better school now because there's no transfer policy. And that was as naive as I was back at being 19 years old.
Yeah. No, it's wild. I mean, it's fun because I root for a couple teams in college sports. I'm a huge college sports fan. I root for my alma mater, Ohio State.
Okay.
And football is the main sport that I really like. But I root for Ohio State, and then I root for Duke, which is, where I work now.
Understandable.
And it's really interesting where, it's like if Ohio State has a good football player, we're not losing them. There's nowhere to go from there, right? Like, our biggest concern is they're going to be in the draft in the blink of an eye, right? But with Duke, we have had football players who transfer out into kind of higher tier football programs. But then it's the opposite with basketball, right? If Ohio State has a great basketball player, they may transfer out and go to a Duke or a comparable program. Whereas with Duke, with basketball, we're not losing anybody. Like we're not having people transfer up because there's no up. But it's interesting when you're looking at just rooting for different teams at kind of different competition levels and different tiers of competition. It's just a set of problems as a fan that you've never dealt with before, where it's like, well, if my guy doesn't get enough play time, he's going to transfer to a similar school. If he gets too much play time, he's going to transfer to a better school. If he's too good, he's just going to go to the NFL a year early. So you're like, I just want to watch good players for 3 or 4 years and get to know them. And it's harder than ever to do that. But Helms is going to kill me. I'm talking college sports. That shouldn't be. But the last question I had, he hates any sport that doesn't involve a barbell. last question I had for you. So when you were working with all these, high level professional athletes, I assume that was in the States. Was that at a private training facility? Was that at like an Olympic training center? Was it with a team itself? How did you arrange that?
So after graduate school, I ended up doing an orthopedic sports performance residency in physical therapy, even though I had never planned on really working as a physical therapist traditionally. And that led me into a multidisciplinary center in Southern California that had athletic trainers, chiropractors, physical therapists, physicians, and then also sports performance staff. So we're talking about speed coaches, sports performance coaches, and then also strength and conditioning staff. So it was almost like this meld of everything that I wanted to do all in one spot. And that's where I got my start. And then very quickly thereafter, I ended up privatizing my services, being able to run a more hybridized model between injury prevention, physical therapy, and of course, strength and conditioning, which is my forte, and running that for about a decade privately. And it brought me a lot of different places because I ran my private training business. And then I also like dabbled into contracts here and there. That brought me to working with the Chinese Olympic Committee overseas, working with their Olympians. It brought me on the women's professional tennis tour, going to the Grand Slam tournaments and managing a number of players and everywhere in between. So it was a wild ride, but I think the number one thing in that period of specializing in sports performance athletes was it was really nothing to do with performance. It was everything to do with prevention. And it was making sure that they were healthy, making sure that they were feeling good, and making sure that we're just doing the base things, the foundational principles and practices of strength and conditioning and exercise science that is the least sexy thing in the world. So everyone listening right now, if you've never worked in this setting, you're like, oh, you're not making anyone faster or making them jump higher. You're literally just problem solving around how to make them feel good that day and hopefully being able to compound a bunch of different days into weeks into months in their off seasons or in their training prep to be able to have them just go out and be at their best when they get to competition.
Yeah, we were talking a few episodes ago about just working with high level athletes. We were talking to a sports scientist with the Houston Texans. And that is such a big misconception is that you bring in, I don't know how many people still hold this, but some do. But you bring in a group of fairly normal people to one of these facilities and turn them into an exceptional athlete. Like you made them faster, you made them, infinitely stronger. And more so what the case is that, we have athletics from this young age all the way up to the majors or professional leagues. There's all these different kind of levels of sorting of figuring out who are the incredible athletes. Of course, as an incredible athlete, if you have what it takes to do that, of course you have the opportunity to squander it, drag your feet with it, or lean into it and do the things you should be doing, those basic strength and conditioning things. But yeah, it's such a misconception that there's these like magical facilities that just turn people into freaks. And usually whenever those facilities do exist, they get busted about 10 years later with the big the big DEA sting. But no, I mean, like you said, it's doing normal, high quality, rigorous strength and conditioning and sports science, but just doing it consistently and doing it in a very personalized manner. And he and I were talking about just it's so different when you're working with these people with elite capabilities because they can push their body to things that bodies aren't typically used to handling. So there is a lot of when to put on the gas, when to put on the brakes, how to manage that on a day to day. So yeah, I'm sure it was really cool. The last question I had for you here was, you mentioned you didn't plan to do kind of conventional physical therapy practice. Yeah. What went into that? Was it a conscious decision? Did it just not scratch the itch for you? Were you too drawn to performance? So what went into that?
I started my career as a Division I strength and conditioning coach, and it was my be-all, end-all career. I had the most fun there. I loved the camaraderie of being on a team and trying to go in and get those wins and grab those championships, and that was good enough for me. And I grew up in a household of Dr. and Dr. Rusin. They both had their PhDs. My dad was an athletic director. My mom was a dean of health and human services. So we have like this high pressure to continue on education, especially in my household. And I always had really good grades coming through. I was able to finish undergrad in 3 years and be able to go on and to do some different endeavors. And then all of a sudden, about a year into working, I was still living at home, Buffalo, New York, shout out. And they were like, I think there's more for your academic future than what you're doing right now. And I didn't know what that meant for me. I didn't know whether I wanted to go in and do a master's and try to go out and do PhD in the type of exercise science and kinesiology fields. I knew I wanted to do performance, but I didn't know what that meant. And then it all came right to a head very quickly because I was driving down Main Street in Buffalo, New York one day, and I was going to see my mom at Damon College, a small, tiny liberal arts school in Buffalo. And I see this huge billboard, brand new billboard right in front of the university. And it had this lady, and she had a Dodgers hat on, and she was in the dugout with the Dodgers, and it said, like, congratulations, first female physical therapist in Major League Baseball history. And I was like, holy shit, that's what I want to do. Like, at that moment, I said, hey, I want to go work in that field, and this physical therapy thing, that seems to be the ticket because that woman just did it. Like, maybe this is for me. And in a 6-month period later, I was enrolled in doctorate of physical therapy, even though I'd never been to physical therapy a day in my life. And I never knew anything really about
Yeah.
the curriculum or the field. All I knew was that I had a scholarship. I was going to go and chase down some baseball dreams 3.5 years later, hopefully. And I got smacked right in the face in my first semester being like, hey, you can't be a full-time strength and conditioning coach and go to a doctorate level program academically all at the same time. And really just ended up being specializing in academics to get through, continuing on with my coaching career for that 3.5 year period, knowing very well that I was getting through those academic classes in order to then again launch back at my dream, which was to go in and work with athletes.
Yeah. It's always interesting, I remember I went and did my undergrad degree in exercise science, and we had a very selective major because it was so lab based at Ohio State at the time. You had to apply to get into the major, and it was actually a very tough bar because everybody wanted to do it. So at Ohio State, exercise science was the very popular pre-med. You could use it and get into just about anything, right? I mean, you could do it and do a couple other prereqs to go to med school. You could go to dentistry school. You name it in allied health or the medical field, you could kind of get there from it. And so, it was very competitive to get into it, but, the vast, vast, vast majority of exercise science students at the time, they would say, who wants to be a physical therapist after this? All the hands in the room would go up. It was kind of this link of exercise science to physical therapy to whatever's next after that. And so, you get a lot of exercise science students who ask, how do I get to this kind of high performance, really fun professional sport kind of trajectory? And the answer is not always super clear. The one thing they will tell you, the one thing they told us, they said, I know, we know you're all going to apply to physical therapy school, and we read all of your applications here, and it looks like every single one of you wants to be the head physical therapist for your favorite professional sport team. So here's the thing. Go find 100 people who have done physical therapy. You're going to find that 98 of them are general population. And it's going to be people who slipped on the ice. It's going to be people who have, some kind of workplace injury. It's going to be your neighbor, your cousin. It's going to be anyone but an NFL player, Major League Baseball player, unless, you kind of, carve out your own path. So yeah, it's always interesting to hear people's, what directions they kind of take. And now there's, we talked to Mark Lewis, as I mentioned previously, about sports science being the new kind of path to kind of get into that world. So there's no easy path, but there are many viable paths. So I'm glad that it worked out for you and you got into that space you wanted.
I think there's some unconventional paths as well. There's no linear path to success. And ultimately, you don't necessarily pick what you're going to be great at or the opportunities that you had. 10 years after working with this selective population with pro and Olympic athletes, I finally made it to the point where, hey, an NBA team was offering me a head strength and conditioning position, and they loved my background and my licensing in physical therapy. They loved my expertise in sports performance and sports science. And I end up going, you know what? No, I'm turning this down. The whole thing that I was working for over the last 14 years, I'm turning it down because my focus just tended to shift. There's a lot of things going on in my mind at that point in time, but a lot of things move towards, what am I really doing? What am I doing as a professional? What am I doing as a man? How am I helping people deeply, not only get into better shape or be able to get a pro contract, but how am I helping people change the trajectory of their lives? Because that's the kind of power that we do have working with people. And I remember like turning down that job and then going home and being like, oh my God, I have so much regret like 2 weeks later, and going back and like, oh no, I'm just kidding. I'll go in and take it. And they're like, no, we've already moved on, as they move on super quick. And then at that point in time, it was like, no, I need to do something more vocational. I need to do something that makes a larger impact than what I've been doing, even though I had a great time, some of the best memories of my entire life doing what I did. But I knew very well then and there that I needed to go a different direction. And that direction was already kind of carving its way out for me, which was working with general fitness population, working with people that wanted to optimize, working with people that were in chronic pain, working with people that had chronic health conditions that needed to go and rebuild their bodies, rebuild their systems, and being able to have like a different trajectory for their life and their lifestyle. And it was hard to like almost start over halfway through like your working career, but it was the best possible thing that could have happened at that point in time, because that opened up the ability to go in and do a lot of the education that I now do today, and then be a true specialist in the populations that I work with, which are the aging populations and the ones that are highly underserved in our industry today.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as someone who, I've talked to the podcast audience knows about it. I dealt with a chronic pain issue for the better part of 7 years. And I can tell you what, I've had a lot of coaches who have helped me on the mat, on the field, on the court, whatever. The, the, the medical practitioners who finally helped me resolve a 7-year chronic pain issue, those are the people that changed my life. Period. There is no question about it. It's like, there is like, if you were to list out the kind of day-to-day impact, there's them and then a massive gap in just about everybody else who's kind of helped out in those peripheral ways with performance and things like that. So I totally understand that. And yeah, I think the capacity to help, I mean, especially when you think about the demographics, I work at a university, and the big thing that no one talks about and everyone thinks about is the demographic, they call it the demographic cliff, where there's fewer young people and a lot of old people. And for a university, that's not great business, right? Yeah. But when it comes to, there's this massive and growing population of people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond who are, dealing with pain on a regular basis. And a lot of people in the late 30s to 50s-ish who are, they're at that critical point in that inflection point where it's like, what are your 70s, 80s, and 90s going to look like, based on the things you're doing over the next couple years and the next couple decades. So it's awesome to hear that you've kind of found your calling in addressing how to get people comfortable with movement, how to get them moving better, how to get them moving in a way that not only fails to contribute or cause pain, but also sets them up to have a more pain-free life than if they did nothing at all. Because that's the one thing that gets, I think, lost on a lot of people is sometimes people wonder, could doing exercise this way or that way cause me pain in the future? And no one really asks the question, what pain will I be causing myself by doing no exercise? And the answer is substantial pain, right? So that brings me to John. I really appreciate it. You sent me a copy of your book, which just came out just under 2 weeks ago, called Pain-Free Performance. The subtitle is Move Better, Train Smarter, and Build an Unbreakable Body. And you wrote this with Glenn Cordoza. So I really appreciate you sending that. I was able to read through it, really enjoyed it, really extremely well done, highly professional, really, really good stuff. And so I did want to take some time on this episode to talk to you about some of the basic principles, because obviously, the book it's not like you came up with principles to write a book. You came up with principles, you have this career, and then you say, I want to organize this in a way that's more shareable, that can get out to people. So the first thing I want to talk about before we get too deep into those book concepts are, I think it's really important whenever you talk about pain to talk about it in a way that's, extremely rooted in evidence. And the Iron Culture, the audience knows I've gone on my rants about this before, so I won't put them through it again. But we've seen in the fitness industry a real big shift in the way people talk about pain, and frankly, the way that people police talking about pain. So back in the day, it used to, we go back to the 80s, no one's really given this a whole lot of thought in fitness, right? It was everyone was kind of locked into this biomedical model or Cartesian model where it's pretty straightforward. And if I'm straw manning this argument, it's unintentional. But for the sake of being concise, basically, if you have pain, it's because a tissue is broken. That pain will persist until the tissue is healed. You probably caused that tissue to break by moving wrong. And the degree to which you feel pain will be approximately linearly related to how broken that tissue is. And that was pretty much it. Pain relates to broken tissue, and you probably broke it. And until you fix it, you're going to have that same level of pain. Now, that's a reductionist view of pain, obviously. It's very much oversimplified. And there was a correction which quickly crescendoed and snowballed into an overcorrection in fitness, which is if you dared to suggest that pain could be related in some cases to tissue damage, you would immediately kind of have like 10 people kind of cornering you on the internet. You have to defend yourself and talk your way out of it and explain your case. So there's this huge overcorrection where people started to embrace the biopsychosocial model, right? Which kind of recognizes that pain is a really unique experience. There's a lot tied up into it. There's psychological elements, there's social elements. Of course, there's biological elements. And so the pain that you're feeling, yes, you feel pain because you did something to your shoulder and you know what you did to your shoulder. But you also feel pain because maybe there is an expectancy effect going on where you were nervous about doing that exercise and then it started bothering your shoulder and that's amplifying your pain experience. Or you hang around with a bunch of powerlifters and everyone's got 7 things that they complain about every time they get up off the couch. Oh, my back and my hip and my knee. And you're in a social environment that predisposes you to look for some of that pain and perhaps amplify it in your mind. But John, we were talking about this before we started recording, and I've written about this more times than I should, honestly. I think people are tired of me ranting about it, but we got so wrapped up, the collective kind of evidence-based fitness world, that we got so wrapped up in the biopsychosocial model, we just turned it into the psychosocial model. And we started gaslighting people into saying there is no correlation whatsoever between the way you move and the things that happen to your body. And even if there were, there's no correlation between the things that happen to your body and the pain that you experience as a result. So, John, after that enormous wind-up and lead-in, I'd just love to hear your experience as someone who actually works in this area directly. What has it been like for you kind of navigating that sea change? Have you had any dust-ups where you've had to kind of correct the record? Have people kind of come after you in that camp, or have you pretty much lived on the periphery of it?
Early on, I'm talking 10 years ago, we had those dust-ups like you're talking to. Getting cornered in the internet brought a smile to my face because I'm like, yep, I've been there before. But I think the name of the book, the name of my company, the name of our certification education system says it all. It's pain-free performance. It's not pain-free, it's pain-free performance, and it's a spectrum in which we live on. We are going to have natural occurrences of pain and injuries and flare-ups and ouchies and boo-boos that happen. It's a natural part of being human and the human experience. But what's not natural is just blaming everything on a model which is not really highly controllable. So when we talk about, especially in pain-free performance, this is subclinical chronic pain styles that we are going to try to train smarter around and be able to resystemize the way in somebody's moving, for a starting point being some sound biomechanics, because that's a great place to start for pain-free and also for optimizing performance. And then honestly, going from there and deep diving in on a lot of these different nuances that need to be addressed, not in one single session, but over the course of a client management topic, when we go weeks, months, years in the management of these people. But really what pain-free means for us is that as coaches, as trainers, as physical therapists, as physicians, when we train, we should not be eliciting more pain than when we came in. So we have a big tenet of trying to reduce a pain signal, trying to reduce a subjective pain signal, and making somebody just feel better. It's super unsexy to say, but hey, being able to move well, being able to be diversified in your movement system allows us to actually reduce the pain signaling, whether that's coming from a mechanical model or whether that's coming from a neurological model and a pain science model. who cares if we're getting the result from it? So we like to start there, but we need to realize that everyone is individualized in terms of the way in which they are perceiving things. And it's not just a, hey, you deadlifted like shit. No kidding, you blew out your back. It's your fault. There are so many different layers of things that we can point to in terms of injury risk mitigation that I don't think get a whole lot of servicing today in our industry because they're just not sexy items. There's a breakout in the Pain-Free Performance book that looks at the zone of neutrality in terms of spine. And that's a concept that, no shit, we should be trying to keep a neutral-ish spinal position. But what does that actually mean? It means that we have these buffering zones that aren't static. They're actually fluid and dynamic based on so many different biopsychosocial physical criteria. It's based on the sleep the night before. It's based on your hydration levels. It's based on your macronutrient partitioning content. It's based on the positions that you're in, the novelty that you're in, the load over the last day, 7 days, 30 days, how much you're ramping that up, and also how much you're actually getting into it in terms of a movement mastery mindset. Are you going in with the volitional control of actually executing it with high quality? So it's not just like, hey, this is the zone of neutral. If you break right or left of this, you're going to be injured. It's not that simple. And based on people's pain responses, this zone is extraordinarily fluid. So part of my job as a coach and as somebody who is educating a lot of other coaches and professionals in the field is to say that everyone is an individual. And we are in the business of matching the two most subjective things in the world, in my opinion, which are human pain and human movement together. And we're trying to manage people an hour at a time, and trying to get them strong and trying to gain muscle and trying to improve mobility and optimize performance transferability. Oh my God, this is a far more complicated matter than just, hey, the biomechanical model is king.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Now, in your book, there's a few elements of this that I'd like to chat about. So first of all, you list in your book, there's a whole section on the 6 foundational movement patterns. So you put in squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull, and carry. Now, my first question is going to be squat, hinge, push, pull. I think every Iron Culture listener, because we do have a bias toward the bodybuilding powerlifting, they're going to be like, absolutely, I'm on board. Can you sell us on lunge and carry being foundational and worthwhile as including into a well-rounded program?
Let's more clearly define what these two things are, and it will give us a better classification to have the conversation around. So the lunge isn't just lunging across the floor with a barbell on your back with walking lunges. The lunge is any type of lunge, split squat, or asymmetrical lower body directed movement. So that is going to be key because we spend 80+% of our movement lives in asymmetrical single leg stances. This is going to be huge, especially for mitigating spine stress, increasing muscular trainability, and simply having a transference into being a real life human being that can move through space. So that is that pattern. And then carry is actually locomotion. Carry is carrying your body through space. So it's the reciprocation of the arms and the legs working reciprocally on the pillar complex, shoulders, hips, and core working together in spiral lines. So this could be something like crawling. It could be something like sprinting, change of direction, agility drills, all the way up into something as mundane as the Airdyne bike. As long as we have the properties of moving reciprocally and actually moving ourselves through space or pretending to on something like the bike, then that is what qualifies there. It's not just heavy ass farmers carries. So those are the two misconceptions that we usually get in the 6 foundational movement pattern model. And very quickly, people were like, yeah, I could see having an asymmetrical stance every now and then with my lower body directed training. And then obviously moving through space, you're not human if you can't get up, walk, run, and start locomoting.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you see this, I'm sure, in high performance sport. If you're working with high level basketball players and every single thing you do is them pushing 2 feet into the floor at the same time, with a completely square stance, that's just not how the sport looks, right? I mean, they're going to need to kind of build up that capacity and that dynamic ability to move and do single leg jumps and things of that nature. So it definitely makes sense, especially when you're looking, I think, people from the powerlifting world, and I was there. Not everybody. People take a million different approaches to powerlifting training, but I do think that my training got very one dimensional. I was very much, squat, hinge, push, a little bit of pull because I still liked having a wide back. That was about it. But it got very, very one dimensional. And I do think, it's always hard to go back from a chronic pain issue
Yeah.
and draw back to exactly what were the causative factors. But I definitely think a more well-rounded program would have set me up for a little bit more success there. I kind of had some issues with my movement quality, but I was able to ignore it because I was strong.
Right.
So it was like, what could be wrong if I'm strong and for the moment pain-free? But then that becomes a little more pain than normal, which becomes substantially more pain than normal, which, all of a sudden 7 years later, I'm like, I haven't done a squat in 4 years. What went wrong? So I definitely, if I could go back and do it again, I definitely would have gotten out of that rigid, overly simplistic approach to training, I think, and kind of broaden my horizons, have some more variability in my movement, more single leg stuff. And it sounds like a lot of what I would have included falls under that combined umbrella of lunge and carry.
Yeah, working with enough power lifters and bodybuilders, there is a bilateral emphasis on almost every style of old school training. When I left a professional sport and I was like, all right, I'm going to go in and work with people that are in pain so they can get out of pain and perform again, I was left in Madison, Wisconsin, where I currently live right now. And I'm like, okay, cool. We don't have any professional sports here. University of Wisconsin, it is what it is with the strength and conditioning. So there's not a whole lot of opportunities there. Who are the best high performers in the state of Wisconsin? And very quickly, I realized, hey, it's going to be your power lifters, number one. It's actually the second strongest state in the entire country, second to Texas in terms of powerlifting. We have varsity powerlifting here in Wisconsin. And then also there is an old school bodybuilding culture here that is very strong amongst the Midwest. And these were the people that were hurt that started coming to me. These were the people that were plateauing. These were the people that were burning out. These were the people coming off of injuries, rehabbing them, and the rehab didn't work because they can't get back and they're still in pain. So that's how I started to get into this type of population. To be clear, I'm not working with people in their like 70s, 80s and getting ready to die. I'm working with people that are in their late 20s, their 30s, and their 40s, being able to optimize because they're at risk of losing what they love to do for the rest of their life. This is everyone's worst scenario. Imagine your life unable to train ever again. I know I wouldn't be a happy camper. And that's what many people are coming into me, people that were squatting in the 700 and 800s, people that were going in and attempting a 900, if not 1,000-pound deadlifts in competition. And these people were hanging on by a thread. And the first thing that we do with anyone, not only these power lifters, but anyone, is look at auditing their entire system. What does their training program look like? And it starts with, are you actually training all 6 foundational movement patterns? Because I do believe that that is a complete movement system that stands up to the test of time, but also is able to layer on specialty on top of it as the foundation. And many times it'll be like, okay, I'm hinging kind of because it's not a pure hinge because it's my competition hinge. I'm definitely pushing, but only in the horizontal plane and only with my back on a bench. And I am squatting, but only to 90 degrees out of a stance that hurts my knees, my hips, and my lower back at the same time. And all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, I'm up for it. This is what we're dealing with. And many times the first line of defense in terms of a rebuild mode was just re-implementing the things that they had lost due to disuse or misuse. So that looked like probably more pulling pattern, more carry pattern, definitely more pure hinging, more pure squatting, and then the ability to then specialize into your sport-specific positions with the barbell. So this was a enlightening 4 to 5 years where that was like a vast majority of the people that I was working with. And at the time, I started to go out and teach the Pain-Free Performance Specialist certification. We've done a ton of courses and a ton of certified coaches over the years. But very early on in Pain-Free Performance Specialist certification, we were having a lot of sports performance and powerlifters come in because it was at about the time when I was working with Dave Tate as a client. So Elite FTS did this year-long thing where it was rebuilding Dave Tate. And it was this big project. I'd fly in every 3 to 4 weeks to Columbus at the S5 compound. We'd redo his training program. I put him through a couple workouts. It was all on video. Dave would bitch and moan about how he didn't want to do split squats and how like he didn't need the vertical patterns. And I was like, all right, let's just get into this. And it was an awesome, eye-opening experience because, Dave is extraordinary and he has so much wisdom, but he was enrooted into what he wanted to do. And a vast majority of the powerlifters, the bodybuilders, and then just normal people out there are very similar even today working with them. But it was funnier coming from like a more polarizing figure like Dave, because he would have these sound bites like, John, why are we doing this split squat? Single leg work sucks. It's half the amount of weight and it's twice as hard and it sucks every time and I never get better. I'm like, that's why you need it. Exactly. But it's an eye-opening experience to, hey, when you lose the thing that you want to do for the rest of your life, you need to do some things differently in order to protect that thing, in order to gain physical autonomy, in order to make sure that you can continue on your path to what drives you. And I think a lot of the people that come to me, they're not coming to me because everything's fucking awesome. They're not like, wow, it's a great day. I'm super jacked. I'm tan. I'm as big as possible. My mobility is awesome. I'm just feeling perfect. They're coming to me when shit's going wrong and they know that they need a little bit of a left turn in order to continue on a path to ultimately achieve their goals.
Yeah. And I do want to clarify for listeners, I'm not, I don't want to lean into, the classic like kinesiophobia kind of stuff of saying, well, I trained too much like a powerlifter for too long and that's why I was hurt for 7 years or anything like that. I never want to lean into that overly simplistic interpretation of my own experience. But at the same time, I do think it's like you're getting at what I experienced during that 7-year period and even the aftermath. I'm still not back to training the way I like. I simply don't want that for people that I care about. And I care about my audience. There's a reciprocal care there. And so to the extent that my, overly minimalistic training program very likely did contribute to some of those issues, my hope is that, people will not view this as, oh, you have this pain-free movement guy on, so now you're talking up all this stuff. It's like, not really. I mean, I don't gain anything from getting on your good side here, John. But I definitely think that it's worth expanding your horizons as a lifter and making sure that you're covering these core competencies. Because I will say with certainty, I went to multiple physical therapists in person as I was trying to get back and kind of figure out what was going on, and they were pretty stunned because they were like, "Wow, you are a very strong person with some very weak muscles."
Interesting.
And what I mean by that is some of my, for some movements, you can imagine which ones I had a lot of strength. But as they were doing some of these assessments in the clinic, they were like, whoa, like you've got some very unexpectedly weak muscles that are mixed in with some very strong muscles. And this is highly atypical. And you also have some major range of motion limitations. So my question for you is, if you were to think through, and I'm not talking bad about powerlifting. I love powerlifting. I love powerlifters. But when you get some of these serious lifters, whether it's powerlifting, bodybuilding, who kind of follow these kind of traditional programs that have some blind spots, what are the most common things that kind of jumped out to you in terms of maybe certain muscles that were just in the aggregate really neglected, or certain joints where there was just extremely limited mobility? Did you pick up on any patterns, or was everybody just a totally different case?
There's a lot of individuality when it comes to being able to power lift at a high level for a long period of time. I think that people will dabble into powerlifting and they'll like go and do 1 or 2 comps and it's like 3 or 4 years in, and then they'll transition to something else, usually CrossFit when they have a kid. And that's not necessarily the people that I was working with. These are like lifers. So I think that the number one thing was that not every single training session, not every single prep needs to be specific to your sport, specific stances and setups in terms of squat, bench, and deadlift. People will be like, holy shit, what are you talking about? When I manage a power lifter in their off-season training, my number one thing is to be able to reestablish their human movement system. So that means that we're going to go and squat for your body type and your anthropometrics and your limb lengths. not just for your ability to move weight. And we do that one time per week, and then we move them into their sport-specific positions, a second exposure per week. But what they're missing is actually the squat pattern, not just the squat exercise for competition. The same thing can be said for bench press, and absolutely the same thing can be said to a larger extent for the deadlift. So I think we don't have to reinvent things, but we need to just be able to diversify our exercise selection and our movement patterning just enough to be able to go in and reestablish close to full ranges of motion in movement patterns compounding, but also at isolated joints. That's 101 of strength training. And then being able to go in and specialize in rebuilding weak links, especially if they're around chronic pain points. We're going to distribute more volume there on compound and isolation-based movements. And we're going to try to get stronger because the science will point to a stronger person is going to be a healthier person long-term. As soon as I say that, people are like, well, I see the strongest people on earth can't even tie their shoes. How are they functional and how are they pain-free? That's not what I'm talking about here. The stronger you are relatively to where you were before, the better off you're going to be in terms of injury risk mitigation. But then from there, being able to just get at the things that the sport doesn't naturally give you. And this is going to be counterintuitive, but when we look at the rule of opposites, not the rule of specialty, but the rule of opposites, that's what a 6 to 9 month period of your off season should look like. What are you not naturally getting from your sport? That is what we're going to specialize in training. And that comes down to just base general physical preparedness for a human movement system that stands up to the test of the volumes and the intensities that these athletes are trying to push at.
Awesome. Yeah. Now, it kind of brings me to a concept. We were talking before we started recording, and you mentioned that you're really big on 6 particular physical characteristics for a well-rounded program. And I kind of stopped you. I was like, wait. Tell me all you have. Let's dig into that a little bit. So when you talk about these 6 physical characteristics, what are they? And why do you think that they're so useful? Why do you think they're so critical for a well-rounded program?
Yes. So the 6 physical characteristics of health and longevity are power, strength, hypertrophy or body composition, if we want to call it that, cardio and conditioning, mobility, and athleticism. And this is what completes a human movement system profile. So we have the human movement system, and then we have the core characteristics. When we put these 2 things together, it's something that we run as a cornerstone of every one of the programs, or the client management that I'll do is called a 6x6 protocol. We want to be always co-managing all 6 foundational movement patterns and the 6 physical characteristics of health and longevity. And many times it's very similar story in the characteristics as it is in the patterns. We are using, if not misusing, many of these core characteristics that are essentially the thing that we just need to get a little bit of a minimal effective dosage at with our training and with some of our physical focuses, just so we can withstand them, because it is a symbiotic unit is human function. It's not just get as strong as possible and that is all that matters, because eventually something is going to have a weak link, something's going to have a pain or a performance plateau, and you're going to have to look elsewhere in order to jump that. But what if we already had all of that in our system already, and we had a base level of competency with all these different things? That is what we're talking about with the 6 characteristics. But, for the average lifter out there, whether they're a bodybuilder, whether they're a power lifter, whether they're just used to doing strength training, I think muscle and strength are going to be the big 2 that people are super comfortable with. But when it comes to mobility, when it comes to athleticism, when it comes to cardio and conditioning and power in a more athletic realm, that is going to be a novelty effect that has huge positive implications if we can just start sprinkling this into a more well-rounded protocol.
Yeah, and that's I've talked to some powerlifters who are really locked into this idea that they need to do this really advanced periodization and stuff like this, and they do whole power blocks and things like that. Do you view it that way in more of a traditional linear block periodization kind of approach, where you say for the next 4 weeks, for the next 12 weeks, whatever, we're going to focus on power? Or is this just a little bit that you sprinkle in kind of throughout most of the calendar year to just kind of keep it?
We will maintain it throughout 12 months a year. But the way in which we emphasize certain characteristics over others is going to be individual basis, but also time of the year basis. Like how close are we to getting after whatever your goal is, and then being able to backlog from there. In terms of like old school style of block periodization, living in the real world, coaching real live human beings, even top performers, professional athletes, power lifters that are world class, it's not conducive to staying consistent on a schedule and not mentally beating ourselves. I just don't see it being a great long-term strategy. There's a gym that I train at in Madison, Wisconsin here. It's the strongest gym in Wisconsin, Madtown Fitness, unbelievable gym. We have people that are world-class at bodybuilding and powerlifting in there. And then you got the college kids. You got the college kids in there, and you'll see that they're like 3 weeks into like a 15-week cycle. They miss one workout and they go back to week one because they're like, oh, it can't work all the way up to 15 weeks. If I missed one workout, I need to go back in and start it over. And as funny as that sounds talking on the podcast to you who knows their shit, that's where the average person is at. They think it's an all or none thing, and this is a big defeatist mentality. When I see...
Just so you know, I teach intro to weight training, so I get to see the exact population you're talking about. I teach it in a college setting, so I'm speaking your language.
Yeah. But what we need to be looking at is being able to have a little bit more flexibility. But I like having 12-week waves of emphases. So an emphasis will be whether we're working on mobility and athleticism on an off season, whether we're pushing towards peak performance on strength and power. I'll use anywhere from 3 to 4 different 12-week waves throughout somebody's 48-week cycle. And I really like doing that because it gives a little bit more time and a more well-rounded approach to being able to have a core focus, because it's always important to have a primary focus in your training. But then we just have to like keep everything simmering. We have to keep it just good enough at a minimal effective dose, and you don't have to go crazy on this stuff. So when we're talking about minimal effective dose for some of these unsexy physical characteristics, we're really thinking about like maybe like 25, 30 total reps of power per week. We're thinking about maybe 15 to 20 minutes total of mobility per week. We're talking about having athleticism maybe being 20 to 25 minutes total per week. And you're like, I think I can do that because that it's 4 to 5 minutes per characteristic per workout. And you're like, I can invest in that. And then the other 85 to 90% of your workout is going to be your core focus, which for most people are going to be muscle and strength. And this allows us to just slow play the neural skill development of many of these novel factors, especially moving like an athlete through space, especially not power, like powerlifting or Olympic lifting or just very bilateral based movements. We're talking about fluid, lateralized, rotational based planes, and then also unilateral focuses using unconventional training tools for power. All of a sudden, you're building these skills up, and it's not just about the muscle and strength. It's about the neurological adaptations that you're building that you can start to almost naturally see a transference into your movement quality, your movement performance, and then that glass ceiling slowly starts to raise in terms of just your competency, even in sport-specific positions.
Yeah, absolutely. How much trouble do you have? And so, when I think one of the things that without question drew me into bodybuilding and powerlifting initially was I cannot chill. I have no, and it's not that I'm an intense personality. It's that I have no ability to embrace subtlety or, for example, when I decided I wanted to learn about exercise science, I said, well, then I'll do a PhD. When I decided I wanted to get in shape, I said, well, then I'll try to go pro in bodybuilding. And when I decided I wanted to get strong, I immediately was like, well, what state records would I like to circle in powerlifting, right? I really struggle. And in some cases, it's been great in my life. In other cases, it's been a huge detriment to my life. But I'm old enough now to know it's there. Whether it can be worked out of me between now and the day I die, we'll see. I'll work on it. But for people like me, which is a decent percentage of the people who get into bodybuilding and powerlifting, these people who they can't just go halfway, they have to go all the way. How do you struggle to convince people that the 15 minutes of mobility a week is going to do anything? You know, with these people who are so into going all the way with everything and being hyper specialized, do you struggle to get them on board? Not with the fact that they can dedicate the 15 or 20 minutes a week, but that it could possibly do anything for them.
I don't struggle with it because they're seeking out my professional guidance and expertise because something's going wrong, very wrong for them, and they need to have a different path forward. And they know that I'll give it to them real, and the investment of their time and energy, I take very seriously. So when I give somebody something, I want to have a results base with it. We want to see that it's actually working. And I think that speaks volumes for this type of mentality. I'm very, very similar. You tell me that I'm going to do something, I'm going to go all the way in it, and I want to do everything. And that only gets you so far, if I'm being completely honest. I'll be the first one to say that I've burned out, I've broken down, I've had catastrophic injuries, I've pushed too hard, I pushed too much, and you learn from it. But I want to make sure that people aren't broken mentally, they're not broken emotionally, they're not broken physically, because most people will push to the brink where they are at risk of that. And that is a tough, tough day. You know, the deeper you dig that hole, the more dirt that you have to fill that hole in to get out of it. And it takes a longer period of time. So my goal is to be able to get people going in and just doing little things that can compound over time to make a difference. And when they feel a difference, they will stick with it. If the shit that you're doing doesn't work, nobody's going to stick with that. Going into physical therapy and getting a sheet of paper with 3 stretches that you're supposed to do at home, nobody does it because this shit doesn't work. And they don't believe that it works, and they don't think that the system is going to help them get out of the problem that they're in. But I think that when we start to see that health is the biggest potentiator that we have for our performance, that is going to be that paradigm shift that clicks in for people and goes, hey, if I not only want to compete at the highest level right now, but I want to continue on doing this because this is what I love to do, then I need to make sure that I'm putting my health before performance. As cliche as it sounds, I am a huge believer that if you put performance in front of your health, you will eventually lose both. If you get the base health taken care of, then you have the highest ceiling possible in terms of your performance, because you're going to be able to withstand the years and continue to get better and continue to learn and mature and gain wisdom on how to essentially explore your body over time.
Yeah, I mean, we see that all the time in powerlifting and bodybuilding. There's the people who go all gas, no brakes. They treat their career as if it's a sprint, and 3 years into it, they've made incredible progress. And you say, oh my God, if we project out 10 years from now, they're going to be unstoppable. But they don't make it 10 years from now, right? And then it's the people who have been doing it they've been doing it quietly, slow and steady for the last 21 years, and they're just freaks of nature. And it's like, I'm not a freak. I just did it consistently over time and didn't burn out, didn't fly too close to the sun, didn't push my luck. I agree with you. You know, as a coach, it was so, I felt like such a hypocrite because I know my own tendencies where everything is all or none, you know? And I think knowing those tendencies and knowing they're not useful, or that they're ultimately counterproductive in a lot of contexts, helped me as a coach to steer people away from that. And so it was very much a like hypocritical do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. But it did help me realize, oh, I've seen what goes wrong when we go all in, full blast, hyper specialized without mind, paying attention to some of these other things. And so I noticed the same thing you did, which is that with my clients, they would, because they sought me out for what I do, they would, heed my advice when I would say, I think it would be good if we included a little bit of this here. And never would they say, well, what would that possibly do? Right. So it's I definitely can relate to that. Now, the one thing I want to mention here, so we kind of talked about these foundational patterns, these foundational physical characteristics for, health and performance and longevity. Another thing that you're really big on is movement individualization and movement optimization. And that sounds good. In principle, I can get on board with the idea that when you optimize and individualize movement, you're probably going to be moving in a way that's efficient, a way that's strong, a way that should be about as pain-free as you're going to get. But my question is a little deeper than that, which is, what is your system for actual individualization and optimization? How do you, when you walk into the gym, brand new client, where do you start? How do you kind of systematize the process of doing that? Because I think everyone would agree on paper that sounds great, but what is the how more so than the why?
You're holding the textbook, my brother. That's one of the biggest reasons that I run the certification courses and then I wrote the book, is that I was able to get it all in one place at one time. When you look at the squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull, carry, yes, everyone should be doing all of those. Cool. That's a great auditing starting point. But what does that actually mean in terms of programming, in terms of implementation, in terms of exercise selection, and then most importantly, individualization of the core patterns? We need to be able to look at people as not all the same. I think over the years in our industry, we've been like, hey, here's the perfect squat. Everyone squat like this, shoulder width apart at the heels, toe out 15 degrees at the toes, and only go to parallel and hold the bar in a low bar position because it's mechanically advantageous, and go. It doesn't work for a vast majority of people. And it could be that way for every single one of these patterns. So we go through, and inside of my assessment protocols, they're quick hitting and they look at anthropometrical variables to be able to put us in the best possible position that is going to look at not the whole system, but one unique variable in which we can get the most data points. So the squat is an example. Yes, we have limb lengths. I think we've known that for a while. Shin length versus the femur length versus the torso length. There's a lot of really cool infographics on YouTube. You can see that in action. But what about deeper than that? What about the anthropometrics of something like the hip type and the hip structure and that joint itself in terms of its angulation, its depth, its height? Because that is going to totally alter the way that somebody is going to position their feet, position their knee to knee distance, have their depth from the butt to ground distance, and also positively or negatively impact the torso angulation at the bottom of a squat. So all of a sudden you're like, wow, by going through and actually spending 2 to 3 minutes and looking at your unique hip type and where we can get the most centration and the most freed up positions, that is where we're going to be the strongest through the most amount of range of motion that we possibly can. And that is the foundational pattern of a squat versus specializing a specific exercise for an activity. But every single one of the patterns has unique anthropometrical variables that we can look at from a common sense approach, gain a little bit of data from it, and then be able to go in and have them moving a little bit better. And I don't think that it's this huge biomechanical model. That only goes so far. 20 years ago, I was working on doctoral dissertation studies, and I had the biomechanical model. And it was kind of bullshit because it didn't tell the whole story. But when you can look at somebody move individual for them, or if you're coming in with subjective problems or pain responses, and then you're able to have them position themselves and then coach and cue around the neural dynamics of the actual execution, then it comes together as an actual movement that could most likely transfer into somebody's life. But, we go step by step, pattern by pattern with simple screens and also assessment protocols to get people moving for their body, not for somebody else's. And I think that core construct is so hard for people to understand right off the bat, is that there is no one perfect movement. There will never be a perfect way to squat or deadlift or do a single leg pattern or push a dumbbell up overhead. It's going to be really individual to the way that you're feeling, the way that you're functioning, and then the things that you can't change, like your bony structures.
Now, do you ever have situations, or would you in a hypothetical, let's say you've got a power lifter, right? And powerlifting generally is going to reward people who go for a nice hip dominant low bar squat, right? You want to get to legal depth, but no deeper.
Absolutely.
Right? Would you find yourself in a scenario where you do an assessment with a power lifter? You kind of figure out, okay, here's what we're getting with your hips. Based on that, I'm thinking we should have, this kind of torso angle, this kind of width with your feet, this kind of toe angle. You kind of, deconstruct and reconstruct the whole thing, but you end up with them where, their kind of most optimized, individualized squat, maybe it looks like this, kind of Olympic weightlifter high bar.
Yeah.
Do you ever run into a situation where you would say, well, for the majority of our squatting in training away from competition, we're going to do what kind of suits the way you're built and the way you move, and then we're just going to do like a quick specialization block of your kind of more powerlifting type setup, knowing that it's not necessarily optimized for your body, but it's simply the version that gets you the heaviest load on the bar. Like, how do you address that or reconcile those
That's
two
exactly
things?
what I do. If they come in with pain problems, we're going to go right back to their most authentic squat pattern. And we're going to go in and we're going to train that and we're going to ingrain that. And it's some of the most humbling sessions that you will ever see. The first couple blocks of a rebuild program is nothing sexy. People are going to be goblet squatting. Early on, I'd be like, I can squat 800 pounds. Why do I have this 50-pound dumbbell and why am I doing sets of 20 with it? Because we're trying to rewire your system to simply go in and expose the joints, expose some of the soft tissues, expose your system to what it was meant to be able to do. And I think that if we can get strong out of that base position, the strong transfers. And we're able to callus the system in such a way that adds to diversity in terms of your patterning, being able to be a little bit more challenged and be able to be a little bit more complete. What I tend to do is I will cycle somebody in an off season on a rebuild, and I will little by little get closer and closer and closer to their end sports specialization stance. And that is awesome because it's not like, hey, you have to goblet squat for 9 months. Nobody would ever come and train with me if it was that way. But we'd go from goblet squats to being able to get into box squat variants, to be able to get into front loaded anterior load variants, to being able to get a bar on the back into different positions and different stances and different ranges of motion. And then as soon as we get closer to that, what they were from a leverage perspective able to compete at the highest level, then everything is stronger. When the system is stronger, when the pattern is stronger and it's more diverse because the foundation is wider, we have a better ability to withstand that sport-specific loading stress when we actually get to the point where we want to specialize back into it. And this is something that I do with every single pattern. But even in competition or in prep, I will keep that natural pattern, that natural foundational pattern in 1 time per week. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. If it's a squat, it could be, 3 sets of goblet squats as a metabolic stress finisher on the quads, at the end of a lower body directed day with a squat emphasis. It doesn't have to be nuts, but you just have to, from up here, keep it in your system so we can have the benefits. It's not just about mechanically loading these muscles and tissues. It's about the neural skills. It's about the motor control that we gain. And it's about owning your positions in different ranges of motion so we can strengthen the entire system.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure that it's hard, when you squat 800 pounds and now you're squatting 185, as you're kind of getting into this flow. But yeah, I think when I'm working with people who are learning to squat for the first time, I always, kind of encourage them and say, we're not trying to get the, biggest squat gains we can possibly get in the next 4 weeks. We're trying to get you a good, comfortable squat you can use for the next 4 years and beyond, or the 4 decades, right? And so sometimes, you will find folks who have already kind of gotten ingrained in a squat pattern, and it's clearly not serving them well because they're reporting a tremendous amount of pain. And, it is hard to kind of convince people, let's go ahead and take those 2 steps backwards so we can take 70 steps forward. But it totally pays off for sure. All right, now, John, your book is close to 600 pages long, and we have 2 options. One is that we could do like a 9-hour podcast, or the other one is that I could get a good hour from you, which I appreciate, I'm sure our audience appreciates, and kind of leave with one final open-ended question, which is, we hit some of the highlights of kind of your views, your philosophies, many of which are really central to this book. If there's one other thing from this book that you'd really want to highlight and kind of give to our audience as maybe a principle or a suggestion or kind of a perspective that you think would be particularly insightful, I want to give you this kind of open-ended platform for the last little bit here. Because, unfortunately, we can't get to everything because this book has a lot in it. But once again, I do want to encourage people, if you found this episode to be interesting, if you heard some things that you found to be intriguing and potentially worthwhile and useful to your situation, the book is called Pain-Free Performance by Dr. John Rusin. It is really, really cool. And like I said, very, very thorough and detailed. So what would be the final thing you'd like to get off your chest here after writing a 600-page book?
The biggest thing that we wanted to accomplish with pain-free performance was to empower people with movement, but more specifically, empower people with smart strength training. I think there's a lot of ideas out there today of people championing strength training, and they don't actually know how to do it. They don't know how to program it. They don't know how to coach it, and they don't know how to put the pieces together for an entire system that we can actually maximally benefit from the actual strength training happening. So being able to make pain-free performance accessible for people to safely strength train, that was the core mission. But there's a reason why it's 576 pages. The first reason is that the publishing house cut us off at that. Second reason is that we had to be able to have systems that were able to be utilized and able to scale for any individual that comes through. We talked about individualization of movement. That is core to being able to be pain-free long-term and be able to perform optimally. But we also need to be well-rounded in our training. We have to have protocols to be able to get ourselves out of pain without having to go to the doctor or the physical therapist every single time that you have a flare-up. All those things are in there, and it's really my life's work in one spot where it's a one-stop shop to be able to run our entire pain-free performance system in one standardized resource.
Beautiful. Well, yeah, I very much hope that some of our listeners will check it out. Like I said, I really got locked into when I was a grad student. I was running all these studies. I had no time, but I still had very ambitious goals for strength and physique and things like that. And I got really locked into this extremely minimalistic kind of approach to training, which has a time and a place. But I went minimalistic, but awfully high volume and extremely high workout density, and kind of layered all these, contributing factors that, like I said, if I could go back, I sure wish that I would have taken a slightly more well-rounded approach to my training and kind of been more mindful of my blind spots and my weak spots, just to kind of maintain that general athleticism, that general movement competency, because I got really good at about 4 things, and that was fine because I thought that's what I needed at the time. And no, I think there's a lot that people can really gain from the idea of looking at your training program as a movement system and making sure that it's comprehensive in nature and that there's no massive glaring blind spots. Now, ironically, you did mention Dave Tate, and I forgot at the beginning of the episode to we have a relationship with Elite FTS. We have a wonderful friendship with them, and so you reminded me. Sometimes I get so into the interviews or the conversation of the night, I forget to do it, and Helms gives me a hard time. But if you want to support our good friend Dave Tate and all of his colleagues over there at Elite FTS, make sure you go over to elitefts.com. They have a great online store there if you're looking for lifting-related apparel, lifting-related gear. If you want to go dig up some old videos with John, maybe they got them on the website there. But yeah, go to elitefts.com. Use our code MRR10, that's Mass Research Review 10, for a 10% discount off of most of the things in the store. John, once again, thanks so much for joining us. It is criminal that it's been 350 episodes and we haven't had you on until now, because you've been a big name in the industry for a long time, doing really great work. So once again, I want to thank you so much for making time for us, and I want to congratulate you. I think the book turned out really fantastic. I was on my porch reading through it the other day with my cat, and I got pretty far until my cat, it's a screen porch, she started climbing the screen, which is not good for the screen, so that disrupted my reading. But up until that point, I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's my pleasure, and I wish you the best.
All right, take care.